What if the person who shaped the next president wasn't seated on stage, but nearly turned away at the gate? What if the one soul who bled for this country, stitched its wounds, and bore the weight of a generation's pain, stood in silence, uninvited? And what if 10 of America's most elite warriors stood up in front of the world, not for the man being sworn in, but for the woman no one recognized? Before we go further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this one. The morning air over Washington, D.C. is crisp, the kind that bites at your skin but makes everything feel cleaner somehow. The sun climbs slowly, casting a golden hue over the National Mall. From the Capitol steps, it looks like the entire city is holding its breath. Red, white, and blue drape the stage like velvet banners of promise. A new day, a new president, a turning point. Crowds stretch for blocks. Tourists, veterans, politicians, and press, all packed together, shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with anticipation. Reporters line the barricades, shivering slightly as they bark updates into microphones. Drones hover overhead. Security is relentless, metal detectors hum, agents whisper into radios, and checkpoints scan everyone from lobbyists to foreign dignitaries. Today belongs to Caleb Foster, the former Marine turned Congressman, now elected President of the United States. Young, decorated, admired for his humility. His story is already legend. A war hero with a heart for reform. A soldier who rose from trauma to triumph. A leader shaped by hardship. But the story the nation doesn't know is still waiting at the edge of the crowd. Behind a cordoned section marked for high-level guests, a woman stands in a Marine nurse dress uniform. The fabric is aged, its edges softened by time, but every metal gleams as if freshly pinned. She holds a small bouquet of white lilies. Her stance is military-grade, shoulders square, spine straight, but her eyes betray a weight far heavier than any salute. She isn't waving for cameras. She doesn't try to squeeze through the ropes or flash credentials. She simply watches, waiting, enduring. No one seems to notice her, not really. A few nearby guests glance her way, their eyes sliding past her like she's a ghost. Perhaps they assume she's a relic of an old war, an over-patriotic attendee who wandered too close. Some smile politely and turn away, but she doesn't move. And across the distance, on the other side of the curtain, Caleb Foster knows she's there. In the holding chamber behind the stage, Caleb finishes buttoning his suit. He stands before a tall mirror, not adjusting his appearance so much as grounding himself. In his breast pocket, unseen by the cameras, rests a folded photo worn from years of being carried in combat. He doesn't look at it now. He doesn't need to. He remembers. There's a reason he hasn't told the world everything. Some truths are too sacred for sound bites. Some debts too personal for political theater. But today might change that. The voice of the announcer booms through the loudspeakers, crisp and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of the President-elect of the United States. A roar goes up. Applause rolls like a wave down the steps of the Capitol. Caleb steps forward, flanked by aides and agents. He walks like a soldier still, measured steps, eyes forward. But just for a heartbeat, his gaze flicks left, toward the crowd. Searching, finding. There she is. His chest tightens, but he keeps walking. The world is watching. Cameras flash. Music swells. Hands reach out to shake as he passes, but he doesn't stop. Every inch of this stage has been planned for months, down to the second. And yet, on the edge of that perfect symmetry, the woman in uniform remains a disruption no one anticipated. A quiet truth in a sea of noise. As the anthem begins and the flag is raised, the woman remains motionless. Not from indifference, but from discipline. You can see it in the way she holds her breath as the jets fly overhead. The bouquet trembles slightly in her hand, not from fear, but from years of memory pressing into this one moment. The camera doesn't linger on her. The world still doesn't know her name. But the story is already shifting. The tension is building. What is she doing there? Why isn't she seated with the VIPs? And why, as the president-elect prepares to take the most powerful oath in the land, does he keep glancing her way? The answers are coming, but not yet. The Chief Justice steps forward. Caleb lifts his right hand. The oath is about to begin, but something else is beginning too, something unspoken, raw, and far more important than any title. The woman in uniform tightens her grip. Her eyes never leave the stage. And somewhere deep in the crowd, 10 men in navy dress blue shift in their seats, men who owe their lives to a story no one has heard yet. Because sometimes, the most powerful moment in a nation's history doesn't happen on the stage. It happens just outside it. Waiting to be seen. She stood just beyond the rope, hands steady, bouquet tucked gently beneath one arm. The cold wind tugged at the hem of her uniform, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes were fixed on the stage, though her presence was anything but welcome. A sudden movement drew attention. 2 security guards approached. Tall, stern-faced, radios clipped to their collars. One raised a hand, signaling for her to halt. The other stepped closer, his gaze locking onto her medals. "Ma'am, this section is for official guests only," the first one said, not unkind, but firm. No room for discussion. She met his eyes, calm but resolute. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I came to witness someone, very important to me." They glanced at each other. Her name wasn't on the list. Credentials? None. Invitation? She shook her head softly. That answer alone, in this setting, was enough. "I understand," she added, voice low but respectful. The crowd around them began to shift. A few guests nearby turned their heads, some with curiosity, others with annoyance. From their angle, she was a mystery, an uninvited figure in a spotless uniform, lingering too close to the polished seats reserved for senators and dignitaries. One guest murmured, "Probably some protester. Happens every year." Another whispered, "She's not on the list, just escort her out." The guards grew more insistent. Not aggressive, but official. Duty left no room for nuance. She wasn't on paper. And that meant she wasn't allowed in. The woman nodded. No resistance, no plea. Just a long, steady breath. Then she turned, bouquet still in hand, her boots clicking softly on the pavement. Her shoulders didn't drop, but her silence spoke volumes. She wasn't just leaving the restricted section, she was retreating from something she had every right to witness. The moment could have ended there. Forgotten. Buried beneath protocol and paperwork. But it didn't. Behind the cordon, 10 men in navy dress blues had been watching. Their posture had changed the moment the woman was stopped. They hadn't moved yet, but their silence was charged. These weren't just attendees. These were Navy SEALs, men trained to observe, to act, to recognize quiet valor when others overlooked it. One of them stood, then another, and another, until all 10 were on their feet. No words, no fanfare. Just a ripple through the seated crowd as their sudden motion drew eyes away from the stage. Someone nearby gasped. Others simply stared, unsure what was happening. The guards turned. Their expressions shifted. Recognition flickered. The woman hadn't seen it yet. She kept walking, unaware of the silent wave rising behind her. The camera lingered on the tableau, a woman walking away from a celebration that should have welcomed her. And 10 warriors standing not for the president-elect, not for a flag, but for her. They hadn't forgotten. They knew exactly who she was. And they weren't going to let her walk away unnoticed. Not this time. She had barely taken 2 steps away when the first movement caught the corner of her eye. One man stood. Not a word spoken. No command given. Then another rose beside him. And another. Until 10 men in navy dress blues stood shoulder to shoulder in formation tighter than any battlefield required. The crowd murmured. Heads turned. Cameras shifted focus. Something was happening that wasn't in the program. The woman stopped. Confused, not yet understanding. One of the SEALs broke formation and walked toward the guards, his chest full of ribbons, his gaze unwavering. His voice didn't rise, but it carried all the authority of a man who had stared death in the face and returned. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, "this woman is not just a guest. She's the reason most of us are standing today." The guards hesitated. They were trained for interruption, protest, even aggression, but not reverence. Not this. A ripple passed through the crowd. Whispers leapt from mouth to mouth. Photographers raised their lenses, snapping rapidly now, zooming in on a moment that refused to be ignored. The SEAL took a slow step closer. "She served in field hospitals where bullets flew closer than we did. I owe her 3 pints of blood in my life." Another SEAL's voice rose behind him. "She carried men twice her size out of fire zones. Stitched us back together when the medevacs were 20 minutes too far. And when we lost someone, his throat caught. She stood by every flag-draped body until the last salute." Now there was no sound from the seats. No more murmurs. Just stillness. The woman's hands trembled slightly, bouquet clutched tight. Her mouth parted, but she didn't speak. Emotion crept up her spine. Not pride, not sorrow, something heavier. something she had learned to keep buried under the weight of duty. The guard stepped back. Not ordered, not asked. They just moved. Because what they were witnessing wasn't disruption, it was recognition. The SEAL who had spoken first extended his arm, not in salute, but in invitation. The gesture was simple. No grand declaration, no military theatrics. Just an open hand, offered with silent gratitude. The woman hesitated. Then she took it. The SEALs flanked her as she stepped forward. Not as protectors, not as security, but as witnesses to a truth no longer hidden. Cameras captured her face now, creased with time, a sharp, bearing the weight of lives remembered. She didn't bask in the attention. She didn't wave or smile. She simply walked with quiet purpose, surrounded by men who owed her more than medals could measure. This wasn't spectacle. It was justice. And in a place built for ceremony, the most meaningful moment came not from the stage, but from those who stood in defiance of forgetting. The nation would learn her name soon. But for now, the SEAL spoke the only language that mattered. Honor. The oath hadn't begun yet. Caleb Foster stood still at the podium, shoulders square, eyes steady, but something was shifting. A subtle rustle moved through the audience, heads turning, murmurs rising, attention pulling away from the ceremonial spotlight. Something unexpected had broken through the rehearsed rhythm of the day. Caleb noticed. He had trained his entire life to read the room, to sense danger, unrest, or simply change. This wasn't danger. It was something else. Something rising, quiet, and powerful, without needing permission. His gaze swept the crowd. And then, he saw her. Time did not slow. It sharpened. 10 Navy SEALs stood at full attention around a lone figure in Marine nurse dress uniform. The sunlight caught on her ribbons, the white lilies in her hands still fresh against the dark blue of her jacket. Her face was turned toward him now. Their eyes locked. And that was when he faltered. Not from nerves. Not from fear. From memory. From recognition that pierced deeper than any applause or anthem ever could. He stepped back slightly from the microphone. A low murmur ran across the seated guests. His aides shifted behind him, one leaning in with concern, whispering urgently. Caleb didn't respond. He lifted a hand slightly, not to silence the crowd, but to dismiss the noise around him. The whispered cues. The pressure to return to the script. Instead, he looked out again. Not at the crowd. Not at the cameras. At her. He drew in a breath. There's someone here, he began, his voice calm but unmistakably raw, who doesn't have a title. She didn't ask to sit in the front row. Didn't demand recognition. But she's carried more weight for this country than I ever have. The air thickened. Some in the audience turned their attention toward the woman now surrounded by SEALs. Others still looked confused, unsure of where this was going, why the president-elect had gone off script. Caleb didn't explain. Not yet. He let the moment breathe. Let silence settle in the way soldiers know how to do. The kind of silence that honors presence, not power. He gestured with a slight tilt of his head, directing attention toward the woman. If she's not welcome here, he said, voice steady, then I'm not worthy of this podium. No applause followed. Not yet. Just stillness. The kind that demands more. The cameras zoomed in. Not on him this time. On her. The bouquet in her hand trembled slightly, fingers tightening around the stems. Her lips were pressed together. Eyes glistened, but she didn't wipe them. Not here. Not now. For decades, she had carried the weight of lives lost and saved, of field notes stained in blood, of whispered prayers spoken into bomb shelters and triage tents. And now, she stood beneath the scrutiny of thousands, wrapped in the quiet strength of those who once bled under her care. Caleb's hand dropped from the podium. He stepped forward, not toward the Chief Justice, not toward the oath, but toward the edge of the platform. People didn't know what to make of it. Commentators whispered in their headsets. Some guests looked back and forth between Caleb and the woman, trying to piece together the unsaid. But he said nothing more. Because the moment didn't need more words. Recognition had already begun to blossom across the faces of those seated near her. Some veterans sat straighter. Others lowered their heads, moved by something they couldn't name. The SEALs remained motionless, forming a wall of silent reverence. Caleb turned back toward the microphone, but his voice, when it returned, had changed. Not louder. Just deeper. Anchored in something personal, something earned. We talk a lot about sacrifice, he said, but rarely do we understand what it looks like. Today, we see it. Not in medals, not in speeches, but in a woman who never stopped serving. The camera returned to her face. No smile. No wave. Just stillness, and tears unshed. And in that quiet, the country waited. The question still hung unspoken in the air. Who is she? The answer was close, but not yet. The truth, as powerful as it was, still needed one more moment. And that moment was coming. No speech had ever quieted a room like this one. Not because it was loud or angry or triumphant, but because it was honest. Caleb Foster stood behind the podium, hands resting on its sides, shoulders still, gaze steady. The stage was full of power, generals, justices, senators, but all eyes were on the edge of the crowd, where 10 Navy SEALs stood flanking a woman the nation had not yet been introduced to. Still she didn't speak. Still she didn't move. But Caleb did. He didn't follow the script. He didn't look to the Chief Justice for the oath. He stepped forward again, just one pace, and looked directly at the section where she stood. Then he said the words that would change how the world remembered this inauguration. That woman is my mother. A collective breath was drawn across the crowd. 1,000 heads turned at once. Journalists scrambled for their pens, mouths open. Cameras zoomed in. The White House social feed paused. Even the flags above the Capitol seemed to flutter more softly. He continued, voice unwavering. Captain Amelia Foster, retired, Marine nurse, combat field medic in Iraq, Kandahar, and Syria. The woman who pulled wounded soldiers from burning Humvees, stopped bleeding with her bare hands, and buried more friends than I can name. She's the reason I'm alive. A murmur began to build, emotional, reverent, electric. She served in a field hospital during my second deployment, Caleb went on. I was just another injured Marine to her. Broken ribs, concussion, 2 liters of blood lost. I didn't know she was there. She didn't say a word about being my mother. Not once. She patched me up, stabilized me, and sent me back to the front. I only found out after I came home, when my commanding officer handed me a handwritten letter she left behind. The woman's face remained composed, but her fingers trembled where they clutched the lilies. Caleb's voice dipped. She didn't want recognition. She didn't want special treatment. Not then. Not now. But I'll be damned if I let this day pass without the nation knowing exactly who stood in the crowd while her son took the oath of office. Now, applause began. It started in one corner, scattered, unsure, but it grew. Like a wave breaking over hesitation. The entire mall was on its feet, hands clapping, many with tears running freely. The SEALs still stood at attention, but the expressions on their faces said everything: loyalty, grief, and overwhelming respect. Caleb left the podium. Every camera tracked him as he descended the steps. Aides reached out instinctively, trying to call him back, but he didn't pause. The Chief Justice lowered the Bible in his hands, quietly waiting. He understood something sacred was happening. Caleb reached the bottom of the steps and walked directly to her. He didn't stretch out his arms. He didn't grandstand. He simply stood in front of her, and for a long second, said nothing. Then he looked into her eyes and whispered, barely audible to those near them, I wouldn't be here without you. She finally moved, just a small nod, just enough to blink back the tears. She didn't embrace him, didn't interrupt. She let him return to the platform without fanfare. But he turned back one last time. Facing the crowd, he spoke once more. This is who raised me. This is who shaped me. And today, she finally takes her place not behind the ceremony, but inside the story. The crowd roared. And in that moment, it wasn't a political event anymore. It wasn't a tradition or an official ceremony. It was something deeper. A nation acknowledging not just a mother, not just a nurse, but the invisible spine of service that never seeks the spotlight, but always holds the line. Caleb turned to the Chief Justice and raised his right hand. The oath was spoken clearly, each word layered with a new meaning. And as the last line echoed, "So help me God," the applause was not just for the president. It was for her. Captain Amelia Foster, the Marine nurse who healed the wounded, buried the fallen, and raised the son who would lead the free world. If you enjoyed this story, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing, heartfelt stories like this. Also, let us know where you are watching from, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Mention names like President Caleb Foster, Captain Amelia Foster, and the 10 Navy SEALs who stood for something greater than protocol. What did this moment mean to you? Have you ever witnessed silent heroes go unnoticed? We'd love to hear your take on their powerful stand. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories of courage, sacrifice, and love to life. See you in the next video.